This slow moving car crash continues to evolve week by week as more and more research comes out that just makes you think, oh my goodness, what next? It's very clear to anybody who is independently observing that something is wrong. This is not right. The way how the pandemic is evolving, the fact that it is spreading so avidly in highly vaccinated regions, something is not right. But there is largely silence from the scientific community and the politicians who so avidly pushed mandates on the population. We have to come back to the science because the impact and the implications of this are there to be seen by everyone and they still need to be addressed. Here is a paper I'll be talking about today about a novel SARS CoV-2 recombinant variant, which was transmitted from a patient with an acute co infection. There's going to be a reason why this is important to highlight. And it just points out that when we heard that what seems to be, I don't know if it was disinformation or misinformation, that the unvaccinated were driving the variants in the pandemic. I remember hearing that and it made absolutely no sense because if somebody was unvaccinated and they had not, their immune system had not seen the virus, they would just get infected. There would be no immune pressure on the virus, it would just infect them. On the other hand, if you had um, uh, immune antibodies that were targeting specific parts of the virus, like the furin cleavage site, you'd be more likely to have variants occurring because they have to get around that immune pressure that occurs from antibodies that are not necessarily completely able to neutralize the virus. So, from a scientific point of view, it didn't make sense, but it certainly made great news and great fodder for those who continue to drive this narrative. So, as we continue to expand on this, I'll take you through this recent paper, but just a quick reminder that coming up next week will be the ugly truth about poor long term COVID vaccine immunity. This is another part of the car crash with regards to what is going on in the immune system. And I'll be trying to take you through in a bit more detail exactly why I think this is occurring, that you're not getting long term immunity after vaccination. This is why so many boosters are needed. What's the mechanism? Why is the immune system rejecting this? And what are the implications going forward? So, if you're interested in that, please go to the description and click on the link below. So, let's get back to this paper. And this paper was only recently published. It's in the Lancet. So, this is a high level publishing house. You can see the authors here, and this author, they're in Sweden, so we appreciate their input. And it was published on the 1st of October, 2024. And so this is the first, just recently published. And so what they were looking at was the SARS-CoV-2 recombinant virus transmitted from a patient with an acute co-infection. The first thing you have to know is that there are a number of levels here that you have to understand from a scientific point of view. The first concern is the co infection. Okay? In terms of a viral infection, if you get infected with a virus, any virus, it doesn't matter which one it is, the standard immune response is to produce interferon. And interferon is a signaling protein or peptide that warns all the other cells that virus is around. So the cells know to put up their barriers, shut down their protein making machinery so that a virus can't replicate. In order to have a co infection, it means that with the first infection, there is no interferon. So that means that another virus can come along and do another infection in another cell. And that's what they call co-infections. But this should only happen when there is not a good interferon response. And prior to the pandemic, co-infections were quite rare and tended to happen in terms of immune suppressed people. They just didn't have a good immune system. And so therefore they could get co-infections. In the context of a normal population, this shouldn't really occur. And the fact that it can occur in itself is a red flag. So let's get back to the paper here. The other thing they speak about here is recombination. And the fact is that it can occur in typical coronavirus replication. And that's where two viruses come together and they share their genetic material in order to make one, so to speak, one new virus. And I think that when I looked back at this, I found a paper that was talking about this. I'll try and see if I can get my point to you here. So this is a paper that was done in from Italy, and this was done, I think, in 2021. And they were looking at recombination in coronaviruses and the fact that what happens is the viruses share the genetic material and they can make up a new virus, so to speak. This was April 2022. And what I was interested in with this paper, I've highlighted it here. So after the first months of the initiation of the pandemic, uh, co-infections were documented without any evidence of recombination. So that's where the virus shares the genetic material. And then it started to talk about some of the specific cases that occurred. One was a Portuguese patient who had prolonged viral shedding, 97 days, with severe disease. And this was an example of a co infection. But what they were highlighting is that it didn't tend to combine, meaning that you had two infections, but you don't end up with a new viral particle, so to speak. So that's an important starting point. So, what exactly occurred in the case of Sweden? So, what they found was in October of 2023, they found a novel Omicron recombinant variant that was detected in a patient during their normal surveillance in Sweden. And it was a combination of two parts from HV1, which was part of XBB, and from BA 2.86.1. So this combination was novel and they hadn't seen it before. And interestingly, the patient had been tested negative 5 days before they then detected the variant. Then another patient, a contemporaneous patient, was also identified to have this combination of HV1 and BA 2.86.1. And the relevance is that this patient now, this second patient, the two patients were hospitalized in the same ward for 8 days. And what that's indicating is that the combination occurred and one patient passed it on to the other patient, which is the novel transmission of a new combination of a variant virus. So this is very, very important because this all came up out of the blue, so to speak. Now, this is the bit that is very inconvenient, but we still have to address the reality. And the reality from the paper, as they kindly pointed out, is that both patients received 5 or more doses of the SARS-CoV-2 vaccine, with the last dose administered more than 6 months earlier. And so they were both admitted for other reasons other than COVID. So it was nothing to do with COVID. They just happened to have COVID, and there was a recombination and transmission. And both had 5 doses of the vaccine. So this is where that question comes about who is driving these variants. It's clearly not the unvaccinated. I mean, that's blatantly obvious at this point. I think one could have gotten away with the propaganda early in, late, maybe even early 2022 when they were trying to blame Africa for Omicron. But at this point, it's blatantly obvious that there is a problem as to why the virus is circulating in highly vaccinated regions and in highly vaccinated people. What is the mechanism? Why is it occurring? That should be the question that the scientific community should be focused on, not the fact that it's occurring. Well, I'll tell you what I think it is. There seems to be, as we said, in some studies, the Cleveland Clinic study seemed to highlight that there was an increased risk of infection after somebody had had the booster vaccine. Some people argue about that, but from the real world evidence, it fits. But why would that occur? And I always thought that when the booster vaccine occurred, it was actually a form of immune suppression, either through IgG4 or interferon suppression. It's almost as if the system burns out the interferon response. And once that interferon response is no longer as active, there is a risk of further infection. But what it seems is that both of these patients were 6 months down the line after having their boosters. And so clearly there is still a problem with the interferon response because co-infections were occurring. These are very, very important pieces of the puzzle because what it's highlighting is that this is not going to go away. We have a situation where it seems that a lot of people are unable to neutralize the virus, and they then spread the virus to other people who have a difficulty neutralizing the virus. What we need to do very quickly is try and figure out who these people are. And I'm going to do a presentation soon about what I think the clinical characteristics are of what I consider super spreaders, people who can't neutralize the virus. And if we can identify them and if we can manage them so that they are able to get over the viral infection, and sadly it will have to be with stuff that they don't want to talk about that probably was used in horse paste. The point being is that those people need to have an effective antiviral that will prevent them from transmitting to people around them, because more and more people, because every time somebody gets an infection, that's the characteristic of SARS-CoV-2, it suppresses interferon. So it will then suppress the infected person's interferon. They have an increased risk of co-infection. Therefore, they have an increased risk of recombination events. Then they will make these super variants. This is what Gert is talking about, where it's just a matter of time before a variant appears that completely evades the immune system. This is a risk to everybody. It's not just to the vaccinated cohort, because if you are in a highly vaccinated region, your immune system can only take so much pressure if you are exposed all the time. And so, this is why it's such an important issue that has to be addressed and reviewed. We don't even have acknowledgement of it at the moment. Nobody wants to even talk about these things. What I'm very, very grateful for is that finally we are getting papers where they are breaking down whether or not people had the vaccine. This was a challenge before. In the past, they would just tell us this occurred and they wouldn't tell us the vaccination status. At least the scientific community is realizing we just have to talk about the reality. We have to face the facts that there is a problem here. There's a long way to go in this pandemic. I don't see any easy ways out because I can't see the population controlling these variants without some other outside intervention. And the outside intervention won't happen because the leading scientific community and the politicians don't want to acknowledge that they may have done a mistake in the first place. And so they would rather to leave it alone, hoping it will go away. This is why nobody's talking about COVID. So everybody thinks it's out of the picture. It's not relevant. I'm just telling you, this is a matter of time before this blows up. It's a slow moving car crash. At some point, it's going to hit the wall. I don't know when. I just know that this can't go on all the time without it having significant consequences to the population. So, final point is, remember, join me in this The Ugly Truth about long term immunity. because this is so important. This point alone should change the trajectory of the regulators. And we'll detail as to why I think it's important and then what those implications are when we reflect on the fact that we're getting co-infections, repeat exposure to spike protein. Immune system is not trying to make long-term immunity to spike protein, which is part of the reason why we saw the evidence that in natural infection, natural immunity, only a small portion of the natural broad immune response included the spike protein. It all starts to make sense now. But lots of science to do. Look forward to sharing more information with you in the near future.